Capital One's tech team isn't just talking about multi-agentic AI. They already deployed one, Chat Concierge for car shopping. Their tech team built in self-reflection with live API checks to help buyers find a car they love. That's how they stack. That's technology at Capital One.
I'm Yasmin Gagne.
I'm Josh Christensen.
And this is Most Innovative Companies. On today's episode, Fast Company senior writer Ainsley Harris.
This is very new science. And so to make a decision about whether or not to choose one embryo over another, it's very hard to think that you're making a sound decision.
House of Highlights Vice President and General Manager Drew Muller.
And all of it tied back to sports, youth culture, and kind of putting an entertaining lens on what it is to be a sports fan.
And as always, keeping tabs.
The bit of the show is that these people are just not equipped to have these conversations, but they're kind of trying their best.
But first, here's the download, the news you need to know this week in the world of business and innovation.
As of October 1st at midnight, the federal government has officially been shut down. Okay, so we should say we're recording this Wednesday afternoon. You're listening to this Thursday evening. Who knows what's going to happen between then and now? Maybe we'll have an update. Maybe you won't hear this at all because Hakeem Jeffries and Chuck Schumer are in charge of maintaining this sort of stonewall. Anyways, because Congress failed to reach a consensus on a funding package by the September 30th deadline, all but essential services of the government, such as Social Security, Medicare, SNAP benefits, and the TSA and air traffic controllers will cease operations until a deal is reached. Millions of federal workers will be without pay for the duration of the shutdown, with the White House threatening mass firings in the days prior. Wall Street's major indexes all opened lower, falling as much as 0.5%. The last government shutdown occurred in 2019 during Trump's first term.
On Monday, YouTube agreed to pay out $24.5 million to settle a lawsuit brought on by President Trump and others over their suspensions from the platform after the January 6th riots. At the time, YouTube froze the president's accounts out of concern that further uploaded videos could incite more violence. Trump filed a lawsuit against YouTube in October 2021, arguing that he had been wrongfully censored by the platform. $22 million of the settlement will go to Trump, which he has ordered to be funneled into construction costs for the White House ballroom, along with the trust for the National Mall. My God. The other plaintiffs in the case will be distributed the remaining $2.5 million.
YouTube was like, in 2020, we just didn't want any more violence. We wanted to filter people towards our mainstays. 9/11 was an inside job and louder with Crowder. Anyways, next, Americans will soon have a new way to purchase allegedly will have a new way to purchase prescriptions drugs. This may not be a real story. I just want to preface this. This may have never actually happened. President Trump announced Tuesday the creation of Trump RX, a direct-to-consumer website for the purchase of drugs. I just also love that it's not prescription drugs in the script. It's just the purchase of drugs. I hope that you can get just like Molly on it, but it's probably mostly dick pills. Consumers will be able to purchase some drugs from pharmaceutical company Pfizer via the website as well. Additionally, in exchange for a 3-year exemption from tariffs, Pfizer plans to offer all its drugs to Medicaid at a discounted price, as well as introduce new drugs at a reduced price. Trump RX will be live in 2026, allegedly.
Will be is bold.
Yeah, will be. It's definitely going to happen, sure.
God, I hate that I'm the person who has to read the AI roundup this week.
You got to just power through it. There's so much AI news.
There's so much AI news.
Y'all, lots of AI news. We're going to rapid fire through it.
OpenAI rolled out parental controls to its chatbot. Parents will now be able to control their children's exposure to sensitive content, when their child can use ChatGPT, and if there are signs that their kids might be thinking about self-harm, among other features. This shit is not going to work. Anyway, OpenAI.
I mean, I like the attempt.
OpenAI also rolled out an instant checkout feature to its ChatGPT chatbot. U.S. users may now make Etsy and Shopify purchases within their conversations. So dangerous for me. Oh my God.
That's so dangerous for you. Do you know those shops? This always seems like magic to me. The ones where you don't actually have to check out. You just walk. They're in airports sometimes. You walk in, grab what you want, and walk out.
Yeah, the Amazon Just Walk Out technology. I wrote about it for an issue a couple of years ago.
Yeah. Honestly, that's so magical to me.
I know.
It's insane.
Especially because the scanners are always, you spend forever trying to scan something at the self-check. Anyway, that's cool. Although, I bet they take your data. But they could probably take your data either way. Anyway.
Who doesn't have our data?
I know. It's like, do you need to know that I bought some gum and Cheetos? Now, for $30. Anyway, AI company Anthropic announced the release of Claude Sonnet 4.5 on Monday. The model will be available via the Claude chatbot as well as the Claude API. Anthropic claims that this new model is able to build production-ready applications and offer state-of-the-art coding benchmark performance. Now, Claude Sonnet sounds so beautiful to me. Anyway.
Claude Sonnet.
And California Governor Gavin Newsom has signed into law the first AI transparency and safety bill. We've talked about this before.
A few times.
SB 53 will require the likes of OpenAI, Meta, Anthropic, Google DeepMind, and other large AI labs to be transparent about their safety protocols. The bill also establishes a mechanism for reporting of safety incidents.
Oh, that was a lot of AI news. Now, we got a shit ton of C-suite news because companies be making moves.
This week is too much. And it's
this week?
Midweek.
This week, yeah. This week. It's all many. Well, okay, let's go through them. First, because you're maybe listening to us right now on Spotify, Daniel Ek, the CEO of Spotify, announced he'll be leaving his role by the end of the year. 2 new co-CEOs will take his place. Alex Nordstrom, the current co-president and chief business officer, and Gustav Soderstrom. I think I got that right. The company's co-president and most stereotypical Scandinavian.
Yeah. Not Gustav.
Gustav Soderstrom. There is 2. What are those called above the O's?
Umlauts.
There's 2 umlauts.
Or diuresis? Anyway, listen, whatever.
Okay, comparative lit major. You should know this. Anyways, Gustav is the chief product and technology officer.
Dude, I really think co-presidents, don't work. But anyway,
co-presidents
that's fine.
Is so funny to me. We just talked about a company last week that's going to have co-presidents. And I forget because my mind is a sieve. Next, we got Comcast is moving some stuff around as part of a restructuring plan. Comcast president Michael Cavanaugh, his middle name is Gustav.
Michael Gustav.
No, it's not. Michael Cavanaugh will step into the role of co-CEO at the beginning of next year. Brian Roberts will continue in his roles as chairman and co-CEO. The plan will spin Comcast cable networks into a new entity called Versant.
They've been teasing this forever.
Oh my God. It was going to be Spinco, which I think is funny. Versant.
Versant is like the fakest sounding company. Well, up there with Super Microcomputers.
Yeah, super microcomputers will always take the cake. And finally, in our C-suite roundup, Chief Technology Officer of Starbucks, Deb Hall-Lefevre, has resigned, leaving the role vacant for the time being. Her resignation comes amid turmoil at the company as CEO Brian Niccol pushes for more tech in stores, as well as a second round of cuts in corporate roles. There's a lot of changes happening.
And a bunch of closures.
Yeah, they closed
overnight.
20 stores in New York.
And the one near me in Boston.
Oh, no. What are you going to do?
And my favorite barista, Adna. I hope she's okay.
Adna Gustav. Anyways, if you want to keep up to date with all of the latest C-suite moves, go to fastcompany.com. We cover all that news.
Electronic Arts, the maker of video games like Sims and Madden NFL, will be acquired by private equity firm Silver Lake Partners, Jared Kushner's firm Affinity Partners, and the Saudi Arabian government wealth fund PIF.
There's a jump scare.
I know, for $52.5 billion. The 3 entities will pay stockholders at EA $210 per share. Damn, that's a good return. Oh. EA will be taken private, ending its 36-year run as a publicly traded company. EA's stock rose over 5% in pre-market trading Monday after the announcement.
Damn. I mean, $52.5 billion acquisition to take it private is crazy. That's the largest in history,
I guess,
of a private equity acquisition. I think that's what the...
Is it? I'm not sure.
Go to fastcompany.com, read the story. We've got more
I
details.
guess Jared is just a big Sims player.
big on the Sims.
Yeah.
My memory, like the EA Sports, like Sonic ID.
EA Sports.
EA Sports. It's in the game. Will always just be locked into my memory forever, from like earliest, like NHL 95 from EA Sports. Just
for me, it
crazy.
Was
well, now I don't think they're not
the snowboarding game on PS2 that I was so bad at.
Oh,
do you know what I'm talking about?
Yeah, I know exactly what you're talking about. I loved that game.
Me
I've been
too.
I've been trying to find a copy of it. I don't know if I was good or not. Probably pretty bad because I was a small child.
The outfits were crazy.
The outfits were great. I loved it. I loved though because you could play. There was different ones that were like snowboarding at night, which I thought was so cool.
Yep, I remember this.
I love that too. Well, I don't think EA Sports is probably not going to have any like WNBA games coming out anytime soon.
Well, anyway.
And finally, incumbent New York City Democratic mayor and biggest enemy to New York City rats, Eric Adams, officially announced on Sunday that he is dropping out of the mayoral race.
This is devastating news to me.
Devastating news for content, frankly. He will not be running for a second term. Adams has been polling below 10%, trailing behind frontrunner Democratic Socialist Zoran Mamdani, former New York Governor Andrew Cuomo, and perennial Republican mayoral candidate and vigilante Curtis Sliwa.
Dude, I get all of his press releases and I don't know why.
So funny. Well, I know why. Late 2024 saw Adams' term as mayor rocked by scandal with...
You know what? I think we can cut the rest.
This is an opus now.
I think we can cut the rest.
I know. Our producer, Sam, is so into this story.
Yeah, I know.
And so thorough about this, and I appreciate it. But we can all pour one out for Mayor Eric Adams. Just a truly terrible mayor, but a truly excellent micro-influencer.
One of the most quotable people of all time.
So funny.
And that's the news you need to know today. So, Josh, what is the worst name you've ever heard for a child?
Oh, God.
I follow this subreddit that's amazing. It's called r/tragedy, but tragedy is spelled TRAGEDEIGH. And it's people sharing the worst names they've ever heard.
That's so funny. Reddit is undefeated.
Yeah,
honestly.
Dude, it's such a good subreddit.
That's excellent. What's the worst name I've ever seen? I mean, I think that like
methamphetamine that was on the
methamphetamine. That was a thing. Apple was
that's Gwyneth Paltrow's daughter.
Gwyneth Paltrow's daughter. That's grown on me a little bit. I remember when that came out,
and everybody was like, "It's a fruit," but now I'm like,
"Yeah, it's
fine.
better because then you have Elon Musk's."
Yeah, exactly. XAI. Yeah.
XAI. Xanthan gum is all I think about when I see the beginning of the name. That's the stupidest. It's Elon Musk's kid's name, and it's not that kid's fault. I'm so sorry. But honestly, their name is the least of their concerns.
It's very bad.
They're super rich, but have a terrible dad.
Me and Louise did consider Tariff.
Tariff. What a beautiful... you know what's...
Tarifa.
You know what's really funny? So, do you know the drag queen Jujubee?
Yeah.
Her government name is, I believe it's Airport.
That can't be true. I'm sorry.
I'm pretty sure it is because her parents were immigrants and thought it was a nice name and I gotta look this up. This is gonna get xenophobic. Airline. It's Airline. Yeah.
Well, I love that.
Jujubee's real name is Airline, which I think is so funny, and she does some really good bits about it.
My parents have a friend. Her name is Patrice, but Patrice.
Okay, that's the worst name, Patrice.
No, I mean, it's fine because her brother's name is like Marquis de Lafayette Pitts.
Well, there's worse. It could be the Marquis de Sade.
Yeah, that's fair, but it's also just like an absolutely crazy.
That's so funny. But
ridiculous. The funniest is, like, our tragedy is full of like You know, like white people will name their kids like Riker and Braxton. You're just like, don't do this.
I kind of have some grace for people with baby names because I think it's hard. Because I think about me trying to name these episodes. No, think about me trying to name these episodes and then imagine it with a child's name. There's so much more pressure on that. I feel like you're going to get it wrong, which is why you should probably just go with something like safe and tried and true.
Yeah, I think there's no problem with that. just picking a normal name.
Just call your kid John.
Anyway, the reason we're talking about baby names is because we're talking about a startup called Orchid. Startups like Orchid are allowing parents to use IVF to screen their embryos for not only genetic anomalies, but also to assess the statistical risk of them developing hundreds of diseases, from diabetes to cancer. But while some, like Orchid's founder, Noor Siddiqui, see the technology as a form of preventive medicine, others see it as a slippery slope towards a future of designer babies, where babies are commodities and access to health-optimizing technology is limited to those who can afford it. Here to discuss Orchid and the ethical concerns around genomic screening is Fast Company senior writer Ainsley Harris. Hey, Ainsley, welcome back to the show.
Thanks so much for having me.
So you start the piece talking about your own kind of fertility and motherhood journey. How did your personal experience kind of influence the way you thought about reporting the story?
Yeah, I think for me, I have 2 kids. I've also had 3 miscarriages. And I think I have a very personal understanding of how difficult it can be to get pregnant and to get to the point where you have a healthy baby. And I think as more and more people are having children later, that's something that a lot of people are facing at the moment. And I think one of the things you sort of realize that I think helped give me some perspective on what Orchid and other companies doing this embryo screening process are sort of offering is that the way that the medical system works right now, that you don't necessarily feel like you have the resources that you need or the sounding board that you're looking for. Right now, the way the things work, like you're usually told, try for a year and then come back and talk to us is often the advice, unless maybe you're, quite advanced in your age or have another medical issue. So, there's this sense of that, it's your own problem, like you go deal with it. And I think there's not necessarily a sense that, your doctor is going to kind of hold your hand and help you through this process and navigate it. And it's a very emotional process.
You see it with Orchid, but you often, the way doctors talk tends not to be like, here's your next step. It tends to be like, here are several options available to you. I couldn't possibly advise you on what to do next. And it's like, well, I don't have a medical degree. Like, just tell me and I'll do it.
Yes. Or, it's not their problem until there's a disease involved, There's, they don't really see problems in the way that I think we experience problems as a patient, especially when it's something, so as emotional and personal as becoming a parent. And so, I think there's this real desire that companies like Orchid are sort of tapping into, that where people feel like they, have this huge thing that they're taking on themselves without a lot of help. And then this company comes along and says, we're going to offer you, all that anxiety that you have, all that sense that you're doing it by yourself. Like, we're going to give you all this data. We're going to make you feel in control. We're going to give you this, this experience that makes this feel more like the kind of experience that you expect from a high-end product, and eliminate that sort of sense of uncertainty. And so I think it's for people who are, especially, it's a vulnerable place to be in when you're trying to start a family.
And it's a place where you are primed to spend a lot of money, I think, too.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. This feels like, people already take out loans. There are startups devoted to helping people finance egg freezing, IVF. These procedures that people are turning to, are really expensive already. But I think, we seem to be sort of heading to a place where, many people feel like they have to take that step in order to start the family in the way that they want. And in a way, like if you're already spending the money, I don't know, what's a few $1,000s more? That's a different way to think about it as well.
Yeah. I want to come back to that later because, I think it's worth talking about the sort of inequality aspect of all of this. But first, just so our listeners understand, there's already some genetic screening that most people do when they have a baby, right? NIPT is very common, screening for things like Down syndrome, chromosomal abnormalities, some genetic testing. What is the difference between that and the kind of service that Orchid provides?
Yeah, definitely. Whether you're doing IVF or, have a more traditional pregnancy, the genetic screening that's offered is typically just for some of those, half a dozen sort of primary genetic mutations that can lead to something like Down syndrome. And they tend to be, fairly significant chromosomal mutations. So, you're missing a whole chromosome, like that sort of situation, which is, relatively on the easier end of things that you can detect. And that's, traditionally all that's really offered to people. And what Orchid is offering and what other companies doing this more advanced embryo screener are offering, in Orchid's case, it's a whole sequencing of the embryo's genome, which is really a first and really transforms the kind of information that you can get about the baby or the potential baby. So, they're screening for over 1,000 monogenic conditions. So they're trying to kind of go for that long tail of very rare diseases that you might encounter. And they're also providing you with a risk score for about a dozen polygenic diseases. So that would include things like heart disease, for example. And so that is like a much more comprehensive picture than people have been able to get in the past. And, I think it really sort of transforms potentially like how you think about screening in general, if you can sort of rule out some of these very rare instances that can also be, obviously really devastating to get a diagnosis around.
But, some of the conditions that it screens for are really different. So I think, for instance, this is probably not the right way to put it, but if you found out your child may have a significant risk of getting a certain type of cancer, like, that I think is something that any parent would take into account. If you find out that your child may have some risk of depression, for instance, like, I guess as a consumer, like, what is that experience like and how does the company talk about it?
Yeah, so I think this comes to part of the sort of core issue of why these companies have become really contentious. Those, 1,000 plus monogenic conditions that Orchid is screening for, if their process is valid, like that information is, pretty robust and reliable. At the same time, these sort of risk scores that they're providing to people and that an increasing number of companies, including a company called Nucleus, are providing to people are a much murkier thing. And there are several different sort of reasons for that. One is that these are polygenic scores by nature. These are complex traits that involve multiple genes. And then because multiple genes are involved, like there's also environmental and behavioral factors with most of these things, like hypertension, diabetes. These are things that are really influenced by how you live as much as the genes. So there's that piece of it. But there's also a huge debate within the research community about, how useful these scores are, even if they are sort of accurately calculated. I think there's a concern that, companies are sort of not portraying them in the right way. And a huge piece of that is that the sort of, if you think about a couple trying to start a family, maybe they have, I think Orchid's customers, for example, on average have maybe 5 or 6 embryos that they're, screening through their process. The variance between those embryos is going to be statistically much smaller than the variance between your family's embryos and the general population. And so it's very easy to give people, a score that makes them think like, oh, this percentage improvement is available to me, but that's not actually maybe available within the set of embryos that you've been able to freeze. It's sort of a more hypothetical number in many cases. And so I think, people are kind of prone to misunderstand a little bit the potential difference across these embryos. If you think I have 3 younger sisters, Like there's actually, we think of ourselves, of course, as very different from one another, but statistically, us versus the general population, we're practically the same person. And there is this kind of funny dynamic like that with siblings where you really perceive those differences among yourselves as being quite great in many cases. But yeah, statistically, your DNA and that of your siblings versus the population, there's really, you're practically the same
Nobody's
person.
special.
Yes, no, exactly. Yeah.
I have a question just going back to these polygenic risk scores to just get a little more in the weeds about that. Like, what is adding up to, I'm sure it's different from everything, but like what is adding up to these scores for, say, like risk of hypertension or depression? Is it a lot of like surrogate outcome things? It's like, oh, they're more likely to be taller, so therefore that contributes to a risk score for XYZ thing. Like what is the makeup of these things? It just with that, I guess we could go on for hours and hours about science, and we don't need to be scientists, but like I'm just curious.
Yeah, I mean, I think the way these scores are usually created is either these large databases with genetic data, and the idea is that you sort of can compare the DNA of siblings and sort of start to understand. Again, siblings play a huge role in sort of our understanding of all of this, is being able to make comparisons in that way, and then you can sort of back into these risk scores based on those databases. A huge, question here, of course, is like, what is in that database? Been concerns raised about the fact that those databases in many cases are not incredibly diverse. And so perhaps the risk scores that you're assigning to one family's embryos who maybe are a white family from a Northern European background, like maybe a lot more accurate than a family maybe that has its roots in Africa, where the DNA data is not as robust in terms of what researchers are analyzing. I think we're getting better at creating models that understand those differences. It's maybe not as bad as it once was, but, I think one thing that was really interesting to me as I was doing my reporting is there was a wonderful story around the time that I was starting to do my research in the San Francisco Standard by a reporter there who went and sent in her DNA and her husband's DNA. They don't yet have children, and had them analyzed by Orchid and this other company, Nucleus. And the polygenic risk scores that they got back from the companies were wildly different. So I think that should just tell you right there that there are, different methodologies here, different databases that people are drawing from in different ways. And so, once you're dealing with these risk scores, this is very new science. And so to make a decision about whether or not to choose one embryo over another based on these risk scores that, are surprisingly fluid, when, of course, we think of DNA as fixed, even not without accounting for these sort of behavioral environmental factors that are then going to affect your child, it's very hard to think that you're making a sound decision about your choice of embryo based on those scores. So there's a lot of murkiness here. I think there's also a piece of this that I think the companies are not always doing a good job of translating a risk score into sort of what it means in real life. For example, IQ has been this, huge, I think a lot of the debate that you see people having about these companies, this idea that they could get you a smarter kid, I think immediately sets off sort of.
There was like a rumor that Orchid's CEO in a closed door conference promised people that they could create, or figure out the world's smartest
It's just
babies.
Gattaca.
Like
this is just Gattaca.
It feels a little bit like Gattaca, yes. And I think, and that obviously has people concerned, right? But I think with something like, a lot of these companies are, they'll put IQ on the report, and there is like a disease associated with incredibly low IQ, right? So there are in some ways, oftentimes at the extremes of these sort of traits, there is, an actual disease that we could be talking about. And I think a lot of times the companies, it's one thing to say, we can help you avoid the sort of disease version of this trait. And what they would say is like, well, if we can do that, we can also help you optimize the trait, right? And I think it's quite an interesting claim. When you actually look at something like IQ, that data comes from these databases of siblings and things, where what we're actually talking about is educational attainment. And educational attainment is measured in like months and years. And so it's really an amount of time that we're talking about, and IQ, sort of a proxy for IQ. And the maximum improvement in educational attainment, for example, in one study I looked at that a company would be able to achieve is really just the equivalent of 3 months of school. And so, I think what these companies are not always doing is like, oh, we'll help you optimize this or that, without really translating for the parent that just means 16 weeks of school. Not, we're not giving you a genius, right? We're giving you, some sort of thing that may be in the real world not as significant as the data or the report makes it seem. And so I think that's very concerning to me, that, people would be walking away looking at their report with the wrong impression about what those numbers mean.
It's also worth pointing out there's no way to verify this stuff, right? If you say your kid has based on this, your kid has a 10% chance of, having autism, and then, 10 years after they're born, that kid is diagnosed with autism, the company can turn around and say, well, we did tell you there was a 10% chance. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, there's no way of proving any of this over time.
It's very hard to prove. A lot of this stuff is also the kinds of diseases that you develop later in life. So who knows, cardiovascular disease, hopefully you're not going to be developing that when you're 8 or 9 years old. I think there are timelines here that make it difficult. At the same time, I do think there is a potential for errors that are immediately apparent when a baby is born. And I do wonder if that is going to be a real issue for this kind of very new industry. Essentially, there has been very little regulation in the U.S. Other countries are sort of taking different approaches to this, depending on the makeup of their population and sort of history around how people might be selecting children. But here in the U.S., it's, kind of the Wild West at this point. And, I think the thing that could be sort of the limiting factor for these companies is if there are significant lawsuits, which, we aren't really there yet, but I do think it's something to watch.
In your piece, you describe it as almost a luxury product. How much does this all cost, and what can you say about Orchid's customers at the moment?
Yeah, the cost per embryo for a Orchid report is $2,500. Most people are doing close to half a dozen embryos, and some, even more than that. So the cost is pretty significant, and really there's no point in screening just one embryo unless you have, for example, maybe a family history of rare genetic disease that you're trying to avoid. I think that's probably the use case where people, might be looking at just a single embryo. But yeah, the cost is significant, and a lot of the early adopters have been folks in Silicon Valley who, I think there's a kind of combination of factors here. One, there's sort of that optimization culture. I think, a business like this is really appealing to folks who like the idea of sort of
biohackers.
Elon Musk is rumored to have used Orchid for his twins with Siobhan Zillis.
Is he trying to test for traits that might make his kids not hate him when they grow up?
That is not currently available, Josh, but just you wait. I'm sure someone is going to be offering it before we know
I got a
it.
genuine laugh from Ainsley, and I got the most disgusted laugh from Yas.
Yeah, no, of course, all of this stuff is complicated by the fact that it's a very strange time to be a pregnant person. And, I think we have to what we were talking about earlier, I think there is this sense that you're kind of on your own and you need to do your own research. And there's a huge culture around that on kind of many sides of the political spectrum. And so I think these companies also, sort of tap into that desire that and that habit that people have gotten into where, I need to do my own research. I need to gather my own data. And one of the complicating factors here is that, your DNA, it is your data, right? And so, I think there's, one of these companies, Nucleus, that's really sort of pushing at the edge of, they want to offer IQ and traits and all these things. I think one of the things that's sort of, I can see why it's compelling to people is sort of them saying, this is your data. Like, why shouldn't you analyze your own information? And like, why are we gatekeeping that? And so I think that perspective, I think it'll be really interesting if it catches on, to what we were saying earlier. What is that information really worth? What is really the meaning there? Are you trained to interpret it? Are the algorithms that they're running to give you those results accurate? There are all these caveats that make that sort of promise of, taking away the gatekeeping a little more complicated than it might sound at first. I think one of the hardest things about being pregnant and about being a parent is sort of the ceding of control. But in a way, like, that is also part of the process, right? If we don't cede control and your 18-year-old is still, under your thumb, you have a problem, right? And so, I think it feels like it is sort of part of your growth in a way as a parent to learn that process. And, that's not to say we shouldn't offer screening for terrible diseases, but I also think there has to be sort of a balance. And that sort of letting go. It's hard to know where to draw the line. I think one thing that I also am very sympathetic to, a lot of the folks, and I write about this in the piece, a lot of the people doing this have a really, powerful personal story around why they are motivated to do this. And it's because of genetic disease in their family. And there's genetic disease in my family. I had a cousin who had a very rare condition. I think we all probably have been touched by this in some way. And so, I understand why it's very personal for people. I understand why there is this strong sense of mission. But I also, I think it's important for us all to be talking about the risks, the drawbacks, and frankly, the sort of false hope and potential for false promises, which is, I think, really concerning, especially when we're talking about essentially life and death.
In talking to people a little bit about this, it seems like the true inequality we're talking about is actually already IVF from the outset. These are costs that pile on top of that, but there's already a have and have not system when it comes to fertility anyway.
Yeah, no, it's very true. IVF is only covered by insurance in, I think, a handful of states. And, even if parts of it are covered by insurance,
still expensive out of pocket. Yeah.
Egg freezing itself, incredibly expensive. There's so many costs built into this. I think there have been concerns raised about whether IVF clinics in some cases are perhaps optimizing for profit or, the way that they're incentivized. And actually, interestingly, Orchid CEO Noor Siddiqui was talking with me a bit about this, I wouldn't necessarily call this a moral failing on their part, but the goal for the IVF clinic is to get you pregnant, not necessarily to get, they're not optimizing for the healthy baby at the end of the process. They're optimizing for a successful implantation of an embryo. And those are really different things, actually. And so when they're doing their sort of testing where they are evaluating whether an embryo has the right number of cells and they look healthy and that sort of thing, and grading embryos in that way, that actually has very little to do with whether or not you end up with a healthy baby in the end. And so they are sort of programmed to think in a certain way. And, but you as the parent are programmed, obviously, to want a healthy child at the end of the day. So, I think there's some sort of gaps there in terms of how the system works that I think she's very aware of. And I think that these companies are raising questions about in probably a good way. But yeah, as I said, I think this is, it is a part of the medical industry where profit is a huge piece of how things work.
My last question is really about kind of projecting ourselves forward. I think a lot of people think about stuff like this and things like CRISPR gene editing and think, maybe one day we'll have something closer to designer babies. I think there are companies abroad even already promising that. Where do you see the future of all this going? Do you think that's realistic? Is regulation coming in? What does that look like?
Yeah, it's such a great question. I mean, there is a company that is currently, I think they're funded by Coinbase CEO Brian Armstrong.
He's also an Orchid backer.
He's an Orchid backer, and there is a company that is moving forward with research into the actual editing of the embryos. To get to the point where we actually can control at an individual level with a sort of guaranteed outcome, we are not there yet. And it's a really different problem. And a lot of the research would suggest that we really don't know how to turn the levers in that way. So, it's very complicated. And I think that, if we're still at a point where in order to make an informed decision as a parent about these products, you need to have a PhD in statistical genetics, then we have a problem, right? So I guess that's sort of my perspective on it, is that sort of feels like the situation right now. You probably need to go talk to someone who has a PhD in this in order to feel like you're making an informed decision. And that means, one, that the companies aren't doing as good of a job as they should about communicating about this stuff. And two, that I don't think the science is really fully there yet. So yeah, it's a nice idea that maybe one day we'll be able to eliminate terrible diseases in this way, and maybe editing plays a role in that, but it feels like we're hardly there yet.
Okay, we are going to take a quick break and be back with Josh's conversation with Drew Muller from House of Highlights.
There's a pretty good chance that if you've seen a sports highlight in your Instagram feed, it came from House of Highlights. Seriously, it's a really good follow on Instagram.
Yeah, it is, and I don't give a shit about sports.
Yeah. Oh, well, they have some cultural, they're more than just sports. They make sports.
Yeah, it's true.
They make sports fun. The brand started over 10 years ago as just one Instagram account, posting the best highlights from across the world of sports. But since then, it has grown into a multi-platform media empire. After being acquired by Bleacher Report in 2016, House of Highlights has grown beyond highlights to original content, long-form franchises, and even a sports league of their own, where creators play dodgeball.
That actually rules.
It's awesome, actually. It's really good. It's like Kai Cenat just begging people with a dodgeball. It's a lot of Twitch streamers, too. I talked with House of Highlights Vice President and General Manager Drew Muller about how they have built their brand. Here's that conversation. All right, Drew Muller, thanks for coming on Most Innovative Companies.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Really excited to chop it up with you.
So I want to start from the very beginning. I think a lot of our listeners will probably know House of Highlights, at least in tangentially, if they're not a sports fan. It's really hard to miss on Instagram or YouTube. House of Highlights started as one Instagram account about 11 years ago, right?
Correct, yeah.
And now it's multi-platform, 100 million followers, billions of monthly views. How did that happen?
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, I think the genesis, like you said, was started by a guy named Omar Raja in his college dorm room. And the idea was, I'm not seeing highlights or the highlights that I want on the platforms where I'm spending time. Seems like kind of table stakes now that you see the proliferation of highlights basically everywhere you look on social media. Yeah. But back then it really was a novel idea. And the Bleacher Report leadership at the time, including a man by the name of Doug Bernstein, who was the initial general manager of House of Highlights, led the acquisition of bringing in this Instagram account and bringing it into the Bleacher Report kind of TNT sports world and saying, this account is doing something interesting. It's speaking with young people. It's overperforming in ways that seem to not map to what typical sports companies are doing. Let's bring them in and let's figure it out from there. And it really is a credit to that group at the time that let House of Highlights incubate essentially as a startup within this larger company that is Bleacher Report and at the time Turner Sports. And the first year was really, hey, use sports rights, do this officially as opposed to maybe recording things on your TV screen. And from there, let's figure out if we can make this into a multi-platform media company that can stand on its own and be incremental to what Bleacher Report was already doing so well. I think that was like a really core focus from the early years, was to say, you know, we don't want to cannibalize the advertising base or the audience that Bleacher Report has, because then we're kind of beating ourselves. Yeah. So how do we make this differentiated and give fans a reason to want to follow both accounts, as opposed to saying, oh, well, now House of Highlights is doing this thing that I used to follow Bleacher Report for, I can, unfollow. And it really scaled from that kind of North Star insight. So it was one person that then went to a team of 3 to 5. And there was essentially a group of us that were already at Bleacher Report that were brought together to kind of form this early business that was House of Highlights. I came in an operations and strategy role. There were folks working on social and content and production and brand marketing. And Tiger, who's here, was heading up PR.
Yeah.
And from there, it was taking small steps to say, let's dominate on Instagram. Let's figure out how we can be number one on Instagram before then taking a step into YouTube, before then taking a step into TikTok and so forth, which I know we'll talk about a bit.
Yeah. I want to talk a little bit about the acquisition, because I think what's impressive to me about House of Highlights, and ultimately I think a lot of the Warner Brothers and the sports sort of multi-layered approach to sports coverage, is that the identity of House of Highlights seems to be intact. It doesn't feel like it was just absorbed into Bleacher Report. I think of the two as very much separate entities, despite them being
glad to hear it. It means we're doing our job.
Yeah. How do you think about that? Like, using the resources of a big company that you have that has all of this access, but maintaining House of Highlights sort of independent vibe.
Yeah. It is a lot of what I spend my day focused on. That is, it kind of is an undercurrent no matter what we're working on or what meeting we're in. And I think it leads to a lot of, at times, hard or uncomfortable conversations to say, this is what our voice is and this is what our voice isn't. Right. So oftentimes we'll have pitches from producers on our team that say, hey, this is a great idea and it maps to, a YouTube trend or a TikTok trend. Can we do it? And, the leadership team will oftentimes need to say, no, that's Bleacher Report's lane, or that's something they're already doing really well. And that's not our right to win.
Right.
So I would say a lot of it maps down to just a real steadfast commitment to voice and real clarity of who we are and who we're not. I think a lot of it is due to the organizational structure where House of Highlights is essentially able to maintain operational independence, strategy independence. We have our own go-to-market strategy. We have our own assets and content strategy and logos and identities and even fonts. And it seems like small things, but in the early days, that was the key difference, right? Like the very beginning, House of Highlights' logo was the same as the BR logo, the same font. It was just H/H instead of B/R.
Yeah.
And we were like, how do we make this feel different? Logo, font, color, voice, types of content. And over time, I think that's kind of codified in a way that feels very different in feed. And it's something that we review pretty rigorously. Like on a NBA night, for example, we're looking at, hey, here's how Bleacher Report covered this moment. Here's how House of Highlights covered this moment. Do these look too similar? Like, did we miss an opportunity to cover the same moment differently? Yeah. And I think when we do that well, we're the best in the business at it. I think it's hard to find another sports media company that can kind of play both lanes, but it does take a day in and day out focus to balance the two, because to your point, we do share and eat from the same pool of sports rights and sometimes resources.
Yeah. And it's so opposite, I think, from what ESPN has tried to do very successfully to the point. But ESPN is very much like, we're ESPN. If it's on ESPN, it's ESPN.
Totally.
Which I think has been very successful for them. So I guess from a competition standpoint, do you look at ESPN as competition, or are you just trying to do your own thing and not really worry about that? Like, there's enough pie to eat for everybody.
Totally. In terms of how we cover sports moments, I still believe that the accounts have different voices and cover sports moments in different ways that as a user, I would find it valuable to follow both accounts. Again, that's very much how our team is thinking about it, is in your Instagram feed, do you want to see both accounts? Yeah. Sometimes that comes down to which sports we're able to cover just from a rights portfolio perspective. Like March Madness, for example, like ESPN isn't posting from the men's tournament because we have that exclusively, obviously, with our partner CBS. Yeah. So there are certain sports rights where we do have exclusivity. There are sports rights where we maybe compete to be first to a moment. But to me, the value comes down to how we package and distribute that moment and the voice that we add to it. And that to me is always going to be our right to win. And that's an audience relationship and an expectation that we have to kind of stay really focused on. And I think the other big part is just from an original content and IP perspective, right? So there's the part of the business where we're focused on sifting through the internet and curating the best of the best. And then there's what new ideas do we want to bring to our platforms? And that for House of Highlights has always been creator-led. Yeah. Right? That the creator voices and the talent that you see in thumbnails and kind of driving the narrative are creators. I think ESPN is a lot more athlete focused or reporter focused in terms of people at desks and analysis.
Yeah.
And I think that comes down to what fans expect from a House of Highlights versus maybe a more traditional version of ESPN.
Yeah. Now, you talked a little bit about original content. That has been probably the biggest shift in what House of Highlights has done since it began.
Yeah.
As an aggregator, literally a House of Highlights.
Yeah.
Creating original content, particularly long-form content. Let's talk specifically about YouTube right now. What was the... I think it's part of what like YouTube rewards now is longer content, which makes sense. Longer content, they can put in more ad breaks. If you're not a premium subscriber, you can see 50, 60 unskippable ads over there. And that's ultimately how you monetize overall. But in developing long-form content, what were those conversations about? Because I think going from an Instagram account to something that we're now going to do hour-long programming is a huge jump.
Totally. So I would say in the mid to late 2010s, a lot of what we were seeing when we were programming highlights was that the interactions in the comment section or the general discourse for fans that were in the teens and 20s were around creators, right? So it wasn't just about the highlight. It was maybe how their favorite creator was reacting to that highlight. And again, now in 2025, it might seem like obvious, but back then it really was more of a niche movement that the traditional players didn't see happening. So unless you had like a really clear vantage point into how people in their teens and 20s were consuming sports, you really wouldn't have had that insight.
Yeah.
So when we first started to make original content, it was almost out of necessity creator-led because we were a small, scrappy team. And in many instances, we couldn't afford to pay huge athletes.
Yeah.
There were creators that were starting to blow up on Instagram and YouTube, but were nowhere near the scale we're talking about today. So we were able to form really big partnerships with creators that are now huge and kind of household names.
Yeah.
Supreme Dreams, Mark Phillips being one of those and his group RDC. One of the big original series that we developed first was called the Supreme Dreams Show. So it was essentially working with him to both make sports comedy reactions and sketches, as well as longer form kind of episodic sketch-based comedy. And all of it tied back to sports, youth culture, and kind of putting an entertaining lens on what it is to be a sports fan or to experience sports with your friends in a group chat and things like that.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of the guiding principle was always, how do we create what we curate, right? So like we're curating at all times, and as a curator, you're hoping to find something in your feed. So how do we reverse engineer that a little bit and say, like, what do we hope to find when we refresh our feed and hope to curate? And using that as kind of a guiding principle has led to some really fascinating creative journeys that we've been on over the years. But I think the most value that we've gotten from both building like habitual long form viewership is always making sure that an hour-long video or 2-hour-long video has a clear path to short form. Because again, at the end of the day, we have massive amounts of short form expertise and scale, and people are expecting that from us. So something that can only exist as long form isn't valuable to us, and something that is, only short form necessarily isn't always valuable to us either.
Yeah.
So that you're going to see that come across in the beats of the show and the creative and how we approach it.
So what does that mean for you in terms of like indexing on different platforms? I think like there's always a habit of like, what is oversaturation versus undersaturation, particularly on TikTok and the vertical video platforms? How do you think about that?
So YouTube, I would say, is a mix between, let's call it like our sports IP and rights.
Yeah.
So from a long form perspective, you're going to see full game recaps for, the folks that maybe aren't in the cable bundle and aren't watching 2 to 3 hour games. They typically will come to House of Highlights YouTube for a 10 to 15 minute recap of that game and love that format for them. You'll also then see our long form originals that complement that from a House of Highlights YouTube perspective. Shorts will kind of bleed across all of those. So you'll see the best sports highlights. You'll see viral, youth culture and user generated content. You'll also see our originals. I think as you go from that spectrum to Instagram, that is what I would call the most selective in terms of lowest volume for us related to, in comparison to YouTube and TikTok. And the idea is that, just based on how discovery on that platform has worked for the last couple of years, it's definitely an area where you can inundate users. I think on TikTok, based on how the For You page operates, right? Like that's where the app opens to. A lot of times you can publish a lot more, and those videos will find their homes without feeling like you are taking up all of someone's feed. Whereas on Instagram, if someone follows House of Highlights and we're publishing 100 times a day, it will feel like that in your feed.
Yeah.
And that balance has been really important over the years, is trying to keep Instagram as the cream of the crop and kind of the top most competitive of what you need to see, and putting a really hard criteria through that. And then TikTok maybe opening that aperture and saying, can we hit more passion points that young people have on TikTok? Because we know it'll find its home in a way that's a little bit different than Instagram.
I hate Instagram for that reason.
Yeah.
Because it feels so punitive all the time in terms of like the content you put out there.
The platform is also just going through a weird growth phase itself, where I think they're trying to emulate certain parts of what they've seen success with, that TikTok has had success with, certain parts of what YouTube has had success with, but while still staying true to what they've kind of become in the creator ecosystem.
Yeah.
But from a scaled publisher perspective, it makes it very hard to predict success on an ongoing basis, because again, just speaking through our lens, oftentimes we'll go into our dashboard and just looking at the amount of our scale that is coming from non-followers is unbelievable. And that's changed so materially over the last couple of years because of how discovery is now pushing on Instagram. So you both have to think through the lens where you don't want to abandon your, 50 plus million followers who love House of Highlights for a certain reason. But then you also have to acknowledge many of our most viral videos, you'll go into the back end and see 80% of these were non-followers.
Yeah.
So it's awesome for growth, but it's maybe reaching a new audience for a different reason. And you almost have to be a little bit predictive of where you think the discovery might bring you to hit on those topics.
How do you think about like conversion in terms of getting those people onto your other platforms where you can, to be, blunt, monetize them in a better way? How do you think about that?
So I think some of it comes down to a smart short form strategy, right? Like we talked about, we might, one of our hit series, Fan vs. Hater, is a hour-long essentially debate style show where
you're playing off of Jubilee.
Exactly.
It's a really fun sports
who we
thing.
love. Yeah, exactly.
Far less toxic than Jubilee.
And that's the point, right? Is to say, hey, not all of debate needs to be super toxic. It can still be anchored in sports and fun. And then, when those end, everyone leaves the room and daps and hugs each other, and everyone's good.
Your most recent one was like an Eagles fan. Well, Eagles fans can get a little more toxic,
we actually we published one Red Sox fan versus 10 Yankees fans. So
I need to watch that.
As a New England guy, that'll scratch an itch.
I gotta say, I completely tuned out of baseball for like the longest time because it was just slow. It was boring. It was not for me. Only this year have I gotten back into baseball, and it's just because of Roman Anthony on the Red Sox. So I'm there. I need to watch that video.
Totally. But again, like that series, which is there's a few things there, right? So that series, our focus for that is trying to generate long-form viewership and kind of position House of Highlights as a future of sports TV, right?
Yeah.
As YouTube is increasingly being positioned as the future of TV, and the lion's share of where young people are spending, time watching on their living room devices is on YouTube. We're trying to redefine how people think about what a TV show is. Yeah. And that is our 2-hour long programming on our YouTube channel. Yeah. But to your point, how do we make sure that those that we're not reaching or that aren't already in that net of YouTube still know that this content is happening, maybe develop fandom of that content? And I think that comes down to a tight short form strategy. Knowing what's going to work for our Instagram audience in terms of those cut downs versus our TikTok audience, and ways that we can make people fans of it before they've even seen the long form, I think is a really unique value proposition of that like short to long form strategy. Yeah. So we really think about short form clipping in ways that can bring in new audience that maybe isn't already there watching it on YouTube. So either team-specific, player-specific, topic-specific areas that we know are maybe under-indexed in terms of our existing YouTube subscriber base. How do we hit those short-form pockets on a TikTok where we know it'll find an Eagles fan that maybe historically hasn't subscribed to House of Highlights YouTube channel because we're not doing Eagles content historically. Yeah. So trying to have the platforms play with each other a bit. Creator deals. You talked about creator-led content. It was really out of necessity to begin with. Creator economy and the profiles of these people that you're working with. I think Kai Cenat is part of. He's participated in Creator League in the past. Creator League in the past. He blew up insanely in the past few years.
How has your deal structure with these creators changed? Because
Yeah.
at the beginning, I imagine it's very mutually beneficial.
Totally.
These people are now their own media companies. They're driving
Yeah.
just huge traffic. Are you still looking for okay, who's that next up and coming person who we can get into our ecosystem and it's mutually beneficial versus let's bring in a Kai Cenat, let's bring in, one of the biggest Twitch streamers that's out there right now. How are you thinking about deal structure with creators?
So what we like to say is where House of Highlights specializes is if you're looking at a creator's kind of growth chart, we want to be right here. So right as we see the key signs where they're starting to take off, but before they get to the point where they're a household name and they're the cream of the crop. Not to say we don't still want to work with them at that point, but typically that's when they're getting overpaid by some of the legacy companies or some of the leagues that are a little bit behind, and then say we need to do whatever we can to have Mr. Beast in our commercial spot, right? So I think
we're not going to see Mr. Beast dunking on people.
We may, right? Because I think the special part of House of Highlights' role in the creator economy is that, again, we've been invested in it for so long. We've built a lot of the formats that have now been replicated by many of the big leagues and some of the big media companies that a lot of the big name creators know. We have incredible relationships with them. They know we've been invested in the space for a while. So there's more of a trust dynamic when we go into a partnership where they know they're not just showing up for an appearance fee or to check a box. We're really trying to build special content together and special franchises and IP that can scale. And I think they also genuinely see the value of having their platform amplified on a national platform like House of Highlights. So always having that part very much at the forefront of the value that we're able to bring to creators, I think is important. And then from a structure standpoint, like you said, it went from maybe more standard appearance fee type structures into, how can we get more creative with building IP together? How can we build, whether it's revenue share or e-commerce or co-sales arrangements, we very much, like you said, a lot of these creators now have business infrastructures or they themselves are businesses. So a lot of the bigger conversations are approached in that way. And I think it's allowed us to still work with many of the biggest names in the space, but not necessarily always need to overpay, for lack of a better way to say it. Not to say we don't still pay very aggressively, but I think we have the relationships that allow us to get a little bit more creative with how we structure those deals.
Yeah. I mean, it's fascinating to me how professionalized, to use a fake word, the creator economy has become. We had Andrew Yaffe on the podcast not too long ago, who's awesome, and what he's doing with Dude Perfect is really cool. But the idea of someone coming from the NBA proper, where he was, to run a creator studio is just, it's a trend that we're seeing more and more. Like you see, especially in the comedy space, companies like Smosh or Dropout, those companies becoming really studio spaces. So now this is what you're contending with. You're a media company who's now trying to work now with other media companies, not entertainers necessarily.
As House of Highlights, for the longest time, we focused on how do we make the long, linear live broadcast of sports digestible for young people. And that was short clips, packaging in a fun, relatable voice, getting it out super quick and putting it everywhere that they wanted to see content, and leaning really into that, really far into that. And, around 21, 22, we were we're doing this incredibly well. We've kind of defined a category that is now sports highlights and sports clipping.
I think everyone under 20 doesn't actually watch games. They just watch highlights afterwards. My nephew does not actually watch sports, but he consumes highlights incessantly.
And that's become the lion's share of consumption of many of these leagues. And I think, again, I like to think that House of Highlights played a small part in that. But what I would say is that we always have a clear eye and perspective on the reality that at the end of the day, that is still someone else's content. We are renting league rights, and our league partners are immensely valuable. We want to stay in business with them for the long term, but we also know that they're running businesses, and even a 10-year deal, which can seem like an eternity, eventually those end. And sometimes leagues can move in and out. So for House of Highlights as a discrete business and trying to focus on how we maximize our value, we're sitting there and saying, how much of our destiny do we control? And that was kind of the genesis of this, is to say, if we wanted to build our own sports league and we wanted to make our own property where we could clip everything we wanted to and build it from the ground up for young fans and based on where we see consumption going, what would that look like? And it was, well, we're going to have creators compete instead of athletes, and we're going to distribute it on all of the big platforms where 18, 19, 20-year-olds are spending their time. And we're going to make the formats fun and action dense, and we're going to have the play-by-play guys be huge creators and all down the line. But the core focus was to say, you know, as you said, you know, under 34 sports fans are watching less and less live cable sports events.
Yeah.
Can we build an appointment viewing experience for that fandom? And I think from an advertising perspective, obviously that is super valuable, and it's increasingly hard to reach that audience at scale. So
especially for appointment viewing.
Exactly.
I mean, that's such a hurdle. I guess we're sort of on the other side of the curve of like the cord cutter getting away from linear TV. Maybe we're going a little bit back to that. I mean, you see Netflix has huge deals with live programming, with Raw, with WWE Raw. YouTube just streamed the Chargers-Chiefs game last year. So it seems like we're on the other side of that curve still. You're hyper-focused on 34 and below.
Exactly.
They don't watch linear TV. Maybe they're not a monolith. Maybe I'm stereotyping, but it seems like that's such a huge challenge.
Yeah, I think that audience in the linear ecosystem has been shrinking. Yeah. And I think the early misnomer was that either they don't want to watch long form content or that it's harder to get them in the same place at the same time. Yeah. And I think what we've seen, particularly in the age of massive streamers that are driving live concurrent audiences that, you know, blow your mind, is that people will still show up. People just want to access content in the places where they like to spend their time, in frictionless environments and with relatable voices, and typically in environments where they have the ability to have a community and a two-way conversation, either through chat or through emojis and whatever it is. And again, I think for advertisers that are desperately trying to reach this audience to say like, hey, we need to get this messaging out on a Friday night at 7 and I want to reach 50, 100,000 people under 34 in a live environment, that is increasingly hard to do. Yeah. And again, just for Creator League, like that was our first North Star, is like, can we build a live format that is compelling enough to bring those types of numbers in at the same time and marry all of these kind of key sensibilities that we know exist in the live consumption space. And the early results were just far exceeded our expectations, I would say. And we kind of went from this model where we were doing these huge moments in time a few times a year, but then would bring in a ton of audience, then have people say, well, what happened? Like, when's the next one? Like, how do we become a part of this league? Or what are the narratives? What can I latch onto? To now where we're mid-season on a formal league structure for Creator League of, 5 events, huge team captains that drafted from a pool of creators, $500,000 on the line, and all of those kind of key tenets that build fandom and build a reason to have people talk between events. Yeah. And again, for Creator League, it's now, after every event, we're looking at how many under 34 people did we have in the live window? How long did they spend watching each live stream? How much did they complete? When did they drop off? Yeah. And then from a short form perspective, how did our highlights of Creator League compare to maybe how we cover some of the other sports leagues? Yeah. And I think that's one of the things that would blow people's mind is, like, recently we had a flag football event last month that did 100 million views on House of Highlights and Creator League platforms, which, you can compare that to, some of the things you would think of as huge moments on House of Highlights, be it NBA All-Star or MLB World Series. And it's like,
not many people are not watching NBA All-Star.
But it's an incredible highlights moment that gets, tons of clips because you have all the biggest names.
Sure, mostly just the Fergie the national anthem. It's the only All-Star game that I'll watch repeatedly.
It's still great. It's still out there. But yeah, again, like that is, we're holding ourselves to that mark to say, a lot of times people are like, oh, it's a new niche sports league, but we're putting up numbers that rival a lot of the biggest sports leagues in the world. Yeah. And it's exciting for us because, again, it's a homegrown sports property where we control all of the parameters. So it gets really fun with creative ideas and competitive formats.
Yeah. What creator surprised you the most with how athletic they are?
Every event, I would say yes. Most recent, that flag football event, Rakai, who's up-and-coming creator who's in the Clover House Kai AMP world. Yeah. He had one of the most viral highlights we've ever had on House of Highlights. He had a full field rushing touchdown that I think has driven like 30 million views across just our platforms and got picked up by a bunch of streamers. But some of the moves that he made were pro level moves. And you saw, I think Lamar Jackson liked the video, Quavo's in the comment section, Drake liked the video. So you saw it really transcend outside of just kind of this niche event that happened. I'll send you the clip after this. It is super impressive because it's flag football. So to scramble as a quarterback and make it through the full field was actually absurd. And it was at the end of the game too. So it was a winning moment for him.
We've got Winter Olympics coming up. We've got FIFA World Cup. Any big plans for those events, especially like FIFA World Cup's going to be in the US? It's going to be a huge thing. How are you thinking about those sort of big tentpole events?
So I think our approach for events like that where we're not, in the US necessarily a rights holder is to figure out how we bring kind of our voice and our approach to working with creators and youth culture to the celebration of those moments. So oftentimes we'll populate different types of content series in and around the footprint that these events are happening. And other times we're looking for, the user-generated content off the field or off the court where many of these incredible athletes are spending time with one another in a city for several days or several weeks, and we're able to find amazing moments that they share together, maybe post on their personal channels.
Yeah.
So a lot of it is through the lens of how we amplify the moments that would matter to our audience, but do it in ways that are different than maybe NBC is doing domestically in the US for the Summer Olympics, for example. And then, for Winter Olympics, which is coming up just in a couple months, right? Like we have international rights to the Winter Olympic Games. So being such a huge distributed brand and global, we have tens of millions of followers that are not based in the US. So we still do very large commercial partnerships with our international team. And for the last Summer Olympics, we did a deal with Samsung that was a huge deal that was focused specifically on international markets. So folks in the US didn't see any of our highlights coverage for the Summer Olympics because it was geo-targeted to just those markets.
Yeah. It'll
be similar for Winter Olympics. It'll be similar for Summer Olympics, where within the US, it might not feel like House of Highlights is covering the events from a highlights perspective. But for folks not in the US, it'll be like, oh, wow, this is like the NBA or the MLB or NHL experience on House of Highlights, but for the Summer Olympics.
Outside of that, what are you most excited about that's coming up for House of Highlights?
So we've got 3 events left in our Creator League season. So we've got a basketball knockout, 5-on-5, and then a championship series, and that'll carry us through the end of November. And just based on the numbers that we're seeing, we're very, very excited about what the championship could look like, and just seeing the culmination of a team winning $500,000 and also seeing how the captains maybe handle that money and how much they share versus how much they keep themselves should lead to some fun storylines. And then honestly, the growth of our fan versus hater series and where that overarching brand can go in terms of debate style content for a younger audience. So a lot of that comes down to our focus on YouTube and again, how we're building the future of sports TV and making House of Highlights broadcast channel, right? So when someone is going to YouTube, how do we make House of Highlights one of the few places that they go and say, this is where I'm going to watch my sports content and I'm going to lean back and I'm going to spend hours watching.
Yeah.
So again, those are the areas that I'm particularly excited, in addition to, of course, the upcoming NBA season, the upcoming fall sports season, and all of the areas that House of Highlights is trying to capture the best of what's going on in the internet.
Drew, thanks so much for coming on the show.
I really appreciate you having me on. This was awesome.
Okay, we're back with Ainsley, and it's time to wrap up the show with Keeping Tabs. This is where each of us shares a story, trend, or piece of pop culture we're following right now. And Ainsley, since you're our guest, what are you keeping tabs on?
I am keeping tabs on a piece that came out in Vanity Fair last week by a woman named Zoe Bernard, where she managed to get into the All In Summit.
Yes.
Which, have you seen this story?
Yes. I have it open in a tab, to be honest with you.
Yes.
So I haven't actually read it. But I did see, did you see Chamath launched another SPAC? He had a big Twitter announcement yesterday that was America, I don't know, it was a patriotic SPAC somehow.
Okay.
Anyway.
I missed that. But yeah, not
Jingo
surprised. Yeah, it's a great story. It's a story I'm a little jealous of because I tried to go to the All In Summit. I think I've tried maybe multiple years, and they don't typically allow press.
God.
Zoe applied, I guess, as a scholarship recipient, and they let her in. So I'm really curious. I'm like, what did you exactly?
Ainsley, you needed to be a minority, and then you could have gotten affirmative actioned in.
Yeah.
I'm sure that's
well. Apparently, what the minorities at this summit are, of course, the women, and that's she implies that she thinks that she was let in because there're just not enough women, and they didn't really screen the women properly.
So I love that admission is run like a club on the Lower East Side.
Yeah.
Oh, basically, yes. Yeah, no. And there's some pretty ugly stuff in the story, too, around conversations about women at the summit. So, yeah, it's one of those very sort of fun, gossipy reads that I definitely recommend if you're trying to she does a great job of sort of pointing out that even the people who have paid over $7,000 to be there are not necessarily fans of Chamath. They just think that it's like a way to get to the White House.
Yeah.
And that, it's sort of like, okay, yeah, I guess
probably true.
Yeah, everyone here is just as terrible as I imagined that they were going to be. So, yeah.
That's awesome. Josh, what are you keeping tabs on?
I got another TV rec / keeping tabs on English Teacher. I binged the full second season of English Teacher on Hulu over the weekend. I love that show. It's such a great show. But
I liked the first season. That New York Magazine article was like the weirdest thing I've ever read. Did you read this? Where they
No, I didn't.
It was like they kind of tried to cancel what's his face who started creating English Teacher.
Alvarez?
Yeah, but also didn't. It's bizarre. It is a bizarre piece. I don't know what the goal was. It was very long.
Yeah. What was the premise of the complaints against him?
I think it was that he kept trying to coerce a straight guy into having sex with him.
Oh.
But it was like, it's not like he drugged him. You know what I mean? It was just weird. I think this guy was also making content with him, so the stakes felt weird, but it was not
weird.
Basically, it didn't feel like jail. It just made him look kind of bad.
It just made him look like kind of.
And it was 4,000 words long.
Yeah, that sounds a little bit like that Aziz Ansari story
exactly.
from a number of years ago.
So that's what I thought when I read it. And then I was like, this guy has bounced back like pretty unscathed in a way that Aziz Ansari still has this like weird stench around him.
It was a timing thing with Aziz because it was like right in the heat of like the Harvey Weinstein
he's making a movie now, right? He's making
Aziz?
Yeah.
I think so. I forget what it's called. Yeah.
Let me see.
I mean, part of this is like ultimately.
Is he also going to Saudi Arabia?
Yeah. Good Fortune.
Oh, yeah. The
Seth
Riyadh
Rogen,
Comedy Fest.
Starring Seth Rogen, Keke Palmer, Keanu Reeves.
Yeah. All right. I remember that. Yeah. I mean, it also was like at a time where I felt like it was like. With Aziz Ansari, it was like also at like a dip in his career. Like Master of None wasn't really doing great.
No, I thought it was at a height of his career. Like
really?
Master of None was doing well. It was just off on the heels of the second season of Master of None, which people liked.
Yeah. But it wasn't like...
And he'd written that book like 2 years prior. I don't know. I felt like everybody was kind of waiting for him to have something go wrong, right? Like
Yeah, maybe I'm doing revisionist history here. Yeah, I can't remember. Anyway, well.
Because if it was at a dip in his career, why would anyone care? Do you know what I mean? It would just be like...
Yeah, that's true. I don't know necessarily if it was at a dip in his career. I think it was at like a point where his career was not necessarily like guaranteed. Like Netflix, that was at the time where Netflix was canceling every show after 2 seasons. Because of their like profitability, like their revenue model, you know what I mean? I don't know. We don't need to. This isn't about Aziz Ansari. Now I feel weird about recommending English. No, it's a good show.
Why I haven't watched the second season. Not because I think it was wrong. I was just like, oh yeah, there was that weird article about that guy and like did something else instead. You know what I mean?
Yeah. This is going to sound really dumb and out of touch of me to say, but maybe it's just from like growing up in like musical theater circles and stuff like that. Like just from the cliff notes of that story, I was just
Happens
like,
all the time.
oh, that's like, it's like every guy in musical theater. Like I was a straight guy in musical theater. The amount of propositioning I got, you know what I mean? And that has nothing to do. It's just more of a, I don't know. It doesn't matter. We don't need to go into that culture.
Is English Teacher a musical?
No, it's not a musical, but
Okay.
I mean, it might as well be to some extent.
It's very theater kid.
It's very theater kid, but I like the show because I like the way that they approach like a constant like theme and bit running is just like conversations around like quote unquote woke things. But I think the bit of the show is that each and every character is incredibly ill-equipped to actually have the conversation. So it's just sort of like, it doesn't make a commentary one way or the other. It's just like these people are just not equipped to have these conversations, but they're kind of trying their best, which I think is funny and like a little refreshing and not preachy in an interesting way. But maybe we should re-examine that a little bit. Yes, what are you keeping tabs on?
So it's Paris Fashion Week at the moment, and I'm not here to talk about designers. People were unhappy about Versace's latest collection. I actually thought it was pretty cool.
Go to By Design podcast to hear more about it.
There is an event every Paris Fashion Week that is unbelievably confusing to me, and that gets reported on by the press so much. Like the tabloids talk about this constantly, and it is the L'Oreal Paris Week runway show, which they don't make clothes, but they get like a crazy amount of famous people to just like walk the runway in random clothes. So like People magazine just did a write-up because Helen Mirren was wearing pants on the runway, but we don't know where they're from.
Coles.
Eva Longoria was there. Yeah.
Are they all like former faces of L'Oreal?
Yeah, so they're often L'Oreal spokespeople, but I'm actually not 100% whether it always is. Anyway, this year celebrated Liberté, Égalité, Sororité, a powerful celebration of sisterhood and solidarity, because believing in yourself isn't a luxury, it should be a given. I still do not understand the purpose of this fashion show.
Are they wearing like new makeup looks? Is it like L'Oreal products and then the clothes are like...
A lot of the time it's like no makeup, like they look like themselves, like...
Okay.
But, which is weird, because then you're like, well, I guess you're sending some people down the runway in like drugstore foundation. Okay. But it has been reported on, I think it must have taken place over the weekend, so much, and no one can ever provide a satisfying explanation for why this event took place.
What's the purpose?
Yeah, like, does this sell anything? I don't know. Listen, I want an unlimited budget too, so...
Yeah. I tend to think that like marketing budgets are just going through, it's like we spend millions of dollars, like Super Bowl ads. Like sometimes I think those clicks, but I think a lot of the time it's just like we spent $8 million making and selling this ad. 1 million people searched for our company.
Yeah.
Of those million people, 10,000 clicked on a link. Of those 10,000 people, 50 bought a product. Money well spent.
Yeah. I don't know, man. Anyway, the L'Oreal Paris Fashion Week runway remains a mystery to me. And if any exec wants to call in and leave us a message.
Yeah.
Or send us an email about why this event exists in the first place.
We will air it unedited.
We will actually air this thing unedited. You can call me stupid if you want.
Whatever you want to say.
And that's it for Most Innovative Companies. Ainsley, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Our show is produced by Sam Gebauer, Hawa Atori, and Blake Odom. Editing by Matt Toder, mix and sound design by Tad Wanhams and Nicholas Torres, and our executive producer is Josh Christensen. Remember again to subscribe, rate, and review, and we'll see you next week.